Welcome, everyone. I'm Jesse Mogul, and thank you for tuning in to the American Contingency Podcast. Here at AmCon, we are a united nationwide community of steadfast Americans ready to face any challenge that comes our way. Our mission here at AmCon is to inform you by equipping you with the knowledge and training you need to prepare for any man-made or natural disaster. Through our active participation in our community, you'll have the opportunity to grow by learning from others' experiences and sharing your own. Together, we build resilience and strength through shared knowledge and mutual support. As always, it is an honor and a privilege to be in your ears for about the next half hour. And as I was thinking about fun things to discuss as we finish up 2024, I just go through a tremendous amount of research to come up with topics for the podcast, because I do get that 30 minutes may not sound like a whole lot of time, but in a world where we constantly feel busy, it definitely is a lot of time. So I want to make sure that I bring you something fun and actionable and a cool takeaway. And as I started going through the myriad of topics that I could have discussed, I seem to keep coming across these different articles that were about the myths that exist around being a prepper or being prepared, and organizations that are like ours. And it came to me that some of these are rather funny, and I certainly would love to punk on a few of them and make everyone laugh. And so I started to compile a list from the myriad of sources that I came across, and I will put some of the sources, their names. I don't know if I didn't save links, but I will at least give credit where credit is due in the show notes for where some of these were introduced to me, just to make sure that nobody feels like I'm just taking somebody else's information and regurgitating it. But at the same time, I'd like to sort of make fun of a few of these as they come about, because, I mean, honestly, some of them are just quite funny. And to me, there's a whole comedic thing around this. Whether you need a bunker, whether we're all paranoid hoarders, how do you outrun an alligator? Do you play dead during bear attacks? I mean, most sites that do any kind of thing like this are going to have different ways of discussing some of these myths. And I thought, why don't we launch into it and discuss them in our own little way with some of my humor thrown in. A caveat to what might happen during this episode is I am recently had contacts prescribed to me, and I put them in. This is only day 2, and the left eye already feels slightly weird. So at some point I might have to pause this and go figure out why my eyes are still blurry. If that's the case, you might notice something in the podcast where it sounds like there was an abrupt end and beginning. So just throwing that out there in case it occurs. That's an interesting thing. When I think about my eyes, or I sleep with mouth guards, and I think when I'm getting in my go bag, if it's time to get out of Dodge quickly, do I have those kinds of things ready to go? This is not anything about the myths, but this is definitely something that just popped into my head. If you're a person who needs certain kinds of medications or a mouth guard, or you have glasses and contacts, it is going to be best that, if possible, you get a pair of, readers, we call them cheaters, in your go bag, that you have a set of your contacts available to you in your go bag, so that when you're, going to grab that and running, you're not all of a sudden missing out on mouth guards and contacts and an extra set of glasses and technology chargers, things like that you could duplicate pretty easily. I would highly recommend that you get those in your go bag. Also, keeping an extra set of glasses handy if you do wear contacts, just in case they do go sideways, like I'll have to do later when I leave the house. I'll make sure I have my glasses too, in case my left eye doesn't want to cooperate, and eventually I just have to take the contacts out altogether. So that's definitely something I thought of when they were prescribing me contacts, was I better make sure that these are handy in the case of an emergency, and I've got to get going somewhere. All right, now let's get into some of these myths. There's a lot that people are going to talk about when it comes to being prepared or a prepper or any of those kind of things. And when you go back and listen to some of the episodes in the archive, recently maybe a few months ago as well, I talked a lot about how you could introduce the idea of being prepared to people who don't have the same level of enthusiasm or concern you do. And when this occurs and you start to have these conversations, I have no doubt that you're going to come across some of these myths, some of these straight up lies, or just, misinformations. And it's, fun to actually discuss them in a comedic way, in a humorous way, because some of them are ridiculous and some of them have some level of truth to them that would need to be discussed if you're seeking to introduce people to AmCon and the idea of being prepared. One of the ones that I came across on a myriad of sites was this idea that preppers are paranoid hoarders, that we're doomsdayers, that we think the end of the world is near. That is not something that I would say is true across the entire scope of people who care about being prepared. We care about self-sufficiency and safety during emergencies. It's not about hoarding. Like, my grandma loved to hoard like vases and dolls that she would buy at the VA, which was like a Veterans Administration type thing. It was a place in Oklahoma City where people would donate things to this VA store and then they would sell them, and she would hoard this stuff. That's, to me, hoarding, when you have to follow a path through somebody's house in order to get to room. When we think about being prepared and self-sufficient, we're looking for sustainability. Growing our own food, knowing how to hunt, knowing how to take care of our families, knowing what it's going to take to purify water. That's not a paranoid hoarder. That is, if somebody liked to go camping, they would probably have a lot of the things that we have in our houses just simply for the enjoyment of going camping, where they know they're not necessarily going to have to rely on absolute self-sufficiency because the world hasn't come to an end and they can still hop in their car and run up to the nearest grocery store if need be. But they are going to have a lot of the necessities that they want with them at the campsite. That's not a paranoid camper. It's just a prepared camper. And so to call those of us who are into preparedness paranoid hoarders, it just seems like a real easy way to just say, yeah, whatever, you guys are all crazy. You want to live in a bunker. Let's talk about bunkers. You do not need a bunker to be prepared. I know there are companies who will sell you bunkers, and I know there are people who have tornado shelters underneath their garage. Certainly, those are very handy in the case that you need those. I mean, if you've got an underground bunker and a tornado is bearing down on your house, absolutely, that's probably a pretty great place to get yourself into. But this idea that in order to be in our quote-unquote club means that you need to have a bunker is a humongous fallacy. I'm sure that prepper show from 20 years ago on the Discovery Channel is what created that myth in our world, but it's not real. Right? It can provide protection in extreme scenarios, but unless you are very wealthy and can create yourself a very unique space under the ground, the likelihood that you could stay in your bunker for months on end, again, I know those of y'all exist out there, but for the majority of, let's just say, mainstream Americans, not only are you not going to have a bunker, even if you did, it probably wouldn't be something that would be sustainable for you to stay in for like 3 to 6 months. Nuclear apocalypse and all of that fallout shelter stuff happening. So let's focus on practical preparation, like emergency kits and safety plans. That's beneficial. If people are like, yeah, whatever, you're just a crazy bunker hoarder, I'm like, let's reel it in. Some of these examples I think of people who've been on the podcast or have been a part of us for a while. Mama T comes to mind. Like, she's not a paranoid hoarder, doesn't have, an extravagant bunker. I don't know if she has a bunker at all, but she is extremely self-sufficient. The woman knows how to grow tomatoes like amazingly well. When I think of somebody who would just fall in line with just wanting to be a prepared person, she comes to mind, and in no way, shape, or form would I ever look at her and think, man, you're a paranoid hoarder, bunker living person. You're just somebody, to me, who creates abundance and is wanting to share the way she creates abundance for her family and her community. She wants to share that externally with other people who would like to also create abundance. In emergency scenarios, people are going to get into scarcity mode very quickly. And when that happens, that's whenever they start to get angry or violent or start to steal from one another. Rather than thinking about abundance before the disaster, they get themselves into into scarcity after the disaster, and that's when human emotions can take over. You don't need a military background to be a prepper. Certainly, I would like people on my zombie squad with a military background because I just feel like they're a little bit more used to confrontation and potentially taught de-escalation techniques and certainly the proper use of firearms. But then again, here I live in North Alabama. There are plenty of people in my family who have a lot of experience with firearms who don't have a military background. So when somebody's like, well, I don't have a military background, how good could I be at prepping? That is not something that's necessary. Certainly people in the military will have a lot of experience with self-discipline and hard work and dedication to a broader goal than just their own self-survival, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a military background. I could just see it being extremely helpful. Sort of like anyone can throw a ball. Certainly if you have a really strong arm, you can throw it further, but now we're just dealing in semantics on distance of ball throwing, not necessarily the ability to throw the ball. Same way to me in this metaphor with prepping. You don't need to be a Navy SEAL in order to start being prepared. Nor does it cost a lot of money. A lot of people are like, I've got to spend thousands of dollars on food and provisions. In reality, yes, you can get a bunch of MREs and they will last you 25 years, but a majority of the sustenance that you would want to prepare for yourself, you just wouldn't want to leave in your basement for years on end. You would want to FIFO, first in, first out, like you'd want to rotate it. Even the people I know here in my family, who can and prepare water and do things of that nature, they're looking to rotate those things in yearly to make sure that there's a freshness aspect of it. So at least if something does go sideways, they know from that date that their food was as fresh as possible. So definitely a myth about it costing a lot of money. You could certainly set yourself up on a budget and start adding things in. I would start with food, water, shelter, warmth. If it's me, certainly I would want to be thinking about those things. Shelter and warmth are key. We're going to want water because that takes 72 hours for your body to start having negative effects of not having water, and then be able to bring in some food. I know I got these things from a company called 4 Patriots. Heard it on the NFL radio one morning. They were like, 3 days worth of survival food, and we'll give you 2 sets of 3 days for free just for buying this one. And there's 3 people in my house. So I'm like, okay, well, that at least gets me 72 hours of guaranteed food. And I keep about 20 or 30 gallons of water in the garage that I rotate out every 6 months to a year. So I feel pretty confident with my ability to at least provide us with some food and water. If things were to go sideways, we're at least covered for the first 72 hours of that. Another myth when it comes to the government will jump to my need. It's not that the government won't show up at some point, but we talk about in AMCON a lot. We want self-sustainability, and we want to be able to maintain our own version of our lifestyle if things were to go sideways, and waiting on the government to show up is not a good strategy. When North Carolina recently happened with their hurricanes, and Asheville and other cities around there were inundated due to the rains and the rivers overflowing and things of that nature, there were organizations that wanted to get supplies to those people, and they just could not get in there because the roads had washed away. There was trees down. There was power line issues. There was a lot of barriers to the relief aid showing up to those communities. You do not want to be reliant upon relief aid when it may not be able to get to you. And when it does, do you want to be the 400th person in that line waiting for a 24-pack of 16-ounce bottles of water? So while the government might show up, they do certainly want to show up. It could be delayed for many different reasons, and you want to be able to tend to your own immediate needs as quickly as possible. Another myth would be only preparing for things that might actually happen in your area. You just never know about what could happen unexpectedly. I know when I was living in Indiana as a kid, we had an earthquake, and I just remember we had never thought of earthquakes. I'm not even sure we really knew what was happening for like the first couple seconds of it. But I do remember like sprinting to the front door and opening it and standing in the door jamb, because in 1984, that's what you thought you did. You ran to a door jamb and stood in it during an earthquake. But I remember me and my mom and my sister huddling up in that little doorway at the front entrance of our home while the house shook, and just being completely blown away that whatever was happening was happening. Like, we were on a hill too, so 8 years old, I definitely thought my house was getting ready to slide down the mountain. That did not occur, but certainly it was freaky. So while you may not necessarily need to prepare for a blizzard if you live in Louisiana, you might want to be thinking about what you would need to do if it did get severely cold. In Dallas a few years ago, I remember it getting down into the teens and that community not being prepared for what would happen to their water pipes. You just never know when a cold snap will come in. Recently, a friend was in Austin and they were saying how it was below 32 degrees there. You do want to be thinking about, maybe you're not going to get a blizzard, but you could certainly get very adverse cold conditions that could freeze your pipes. So have you thought about putting spigot covers on outside? And have you thought about what you know about how to keep water running through your pipes while you sleep at night so they don't freeze? Things of that nature. Prepping is only for doomsday scenarios. Well, ask anybody in northern Alabama who was here back in the early teens when the tornadoes hit and there was no electricity for 14 days. That may not be the doomsday scenario we're thinking of when the nuclear fallout zombies begin to try to take over our country. But I would probably put no electricity for 2 weeks, no refrigeration, no air conditioning in the middle of the summer, right up there with a pretty strong indicator of a doomsday kind of scenario. It doesn't have to feel like the end of the world to need provisions. Everyday emergencies like power outages, medical situations, even losing a job. We talk about this extensively when we discuss income and economics. Do you have side hustles? Do you have alternate means of earning a living? If your primary means were to go away, how can you be self-sufficient for a few months while you start to look for a job that will help fill in the gaps and get you back on your feet? These are things that are very much needing to be prepared for, but it's not a doomsday scenario, so somebody else will figure that out for me. As somebody who once had like a 512 credit score, I can assure you no one was thinking about how to get my credit better when I was 24 years old. You've got to take on your own sense of self-discipline in order to achieve the things you want in your life. And whenever you look around and say, well, I only need to prepare for the Cat 5 hurricane or 32 inches of snow, certainly Buffalo and Florida are very familiar with what it's like to get over 2 feet of snow in a very short amount of time or have a Cat 5 bearing down on you. But there's other things that you could be prepared for as well. That's what AmCon helps you realize, is that it's not just about the 7.2 on the Richter scale, that there are other things that can happen that can shake your life up just as factually as an actual earthquake could. And if you're not prepared for those things, then what means do you have to help your family get back up on their feet? When we talk about outside, there's a lot of different articles out there about what's more important whenever you find yourself outside in a quote-unquote survival situation: food, water, shelter, warmth. Is shelter more important than fire? Is fire more important than shelter? I remember when we did the AmCon Adventure Challenge, and one of the stations was build a fire and shelter. Now, there was 2 of us there, so somebody was able to build a shelter while I built the fire. But if we're looking at a hierarchy of needs, certainly shelter would, and again, this is not concrete. There's going to be other opportunities where this may vary, but based off of what I have learned and the research that I did, is that while fire is very important, we're looking for the shelter to be able to create a barrier between us and the elements. And so certainly a fire is going to be important, but if you're just sitting out and it's getting wet and it's rainy and it's windy, you're really going to wish you had something that could protect you from those elements. I certainly would. I don't want to be cold, period. I want to have a big fire that keeps me warm, but I definitely don't want to be cold and wet. I watch movies and these people will jump out of a canoe or a boat, or they'll run through some water and they get their shoes wet and then they come out of the water and then the movie just plays on. But in my head, I'm like, okay, for the foreseeable future, you're running around in wet shoes. That to me is no bueno. I understand in a survival scenario, you're probably going to end up having wet shoes at some point, but I'm not trying to encourage that. If there is a way I can keep my feet dry, I can assure you I'm going to go through a lot of different steps to make that my reality. When there's puddles of water in parking lots, when I'm going into the store, I'm walking around those. Certainly in a scenario where I'm not going to be able to take off my shoes, put them in front of a powerful fan and dry them out. Am I looking at ways to get myself wet and walk around in soggy socks and shoes? So shelter, fire, think about it that way. Certainly if there's other people there, you could be now having multiple people working on all the different projects. Water and food also need to be parts of the things that you're thinking about. But if you're sitting there thinking, which is more important right now, shelter or fire, take in the scenario, utilize your situational awareness, and more than likely you'll find that having some level of shelter that protect you from the elements would be important. I mean, again, if it's 80 degrees and sunny and it's going to be 80 degrees and nighttime, then maybe being underneath a tent or in some sort of, structure doesn't feel as important as starting up a fire and being able to purify some water and cook some food. Understand that every situation is going to require your own level of deliberation. And just know that the shelter and fire are going to be pretty important. But again, if it's 97 degrees, you may not think you need a fire. So be mindful of that. Communication. Oh, I love this one. Oh, I'm not too worried about that. I'll just use my cell phone to call for help. Yeah, I don't know what you guys know about cell phone networks, but there's not an infinite supply of this stuff. These towers can only handle so much traffic, just like if you had a website and there was a delivery of service, a DOS attack on it where somebody floods a bunch of fake traffic to your website to crash your site. You can do this to cell phone towers as well. You can absolutely have too many people trying to use the network at the same time. You're going to get that busy signal. Your text messages aren't going to send through. When people are like, I'm not too worried about having a ham radio, I've got my cell phone, that is right there a red flag to me. So those can get overloaded. It can fall apart. I can assure you, if there's a disaster scenario, everybody and their mother is going to be trying to get on that cell phone network to call somebody to let them know they're okay, or to get some help, or I don't know, check their fantasy football scores. Their phones are going to be needed in those scenarios. And just imagine if there was 30,000 people all trying to use those same couple towers in your town, you're probably going to run into a lot of busy signals there. Another myth that is good while we're talking about homes and disasters is that, and most of you should be familiar with this, so I won't spend too much time on it, but your insurance probably isn't going to cover the things that your area is the most prone for. So I know in the Southeast, you have to have specialized insurance for hurricanes and flooding. I'm sure I know in California, you have to have special earthquake insurance. I don't know if Buffalo has blizzard insurance, but considering, I think I read the other day that they got like 25 or 32 inches of snow in a short amount of time, and the Buffalo Bills weren't able to go to practice. And mind you, what's interesting about Buffalo is that because of the weather conditions that are created by the lake, there'll be a tremendous amount of snow at that football stadium, but then their downtown will have no snow, and it's not that far away. All because of the conditions that are created by the atmosphere and the lake. So you want to be mindful that just because you aren't seeing a deluge of water or snow or wind where you live doesn't mean that 10 miles away, people aren't experiencing something completely different. Living so close to the Tennessee border, there will be tornadoes that are ripping through the forests and the mountains up there, and that's not that far away. And I have to remind myself that because of the way the mountains undulate between Huntsville and Nashville, that there are a lot of different weather patterns that can exist in that 2-hour drive. Heck, I remember driving from Los Angeles to Vegas one time, and there's a rest stop at the top of it's really a hill, but we call them mountains out there. And it's high up enough that there were snow flurries. We got out and played in snow flurries. Like, there was enough by this point that you could scrape a small amount of snow off the ground and throw a little ice ball at people. And this was between LA and Vegas, and it was only occurring at this rest stop up there. I mean, as you drove up there, the flurry started, but this was the only place to pull off and enjoy it. And I just remember being like, wow, I am literally being snowed on halfway between Vegas and LA. It's a desert. It was mind-blowing. Were we prepared? We were going to a conference, so we had a ton of water and snacks that put on our table. So had we gotten stuck there, we could have sustained, but it was just really interesting to think, wow, I'm in the middle of a desert and I'm high up enough on a mountain that I'm actually experiencing snow. Some things about the outdoors that I think are really important. This should go without saying. You cannot drink seawater in emergencies. That is just... there was multiple sites that talked about this one as being a myth. I didn't know that this is still something that we needed to talk about. So if this is something we need to talk about, don't drink seawater. Do not drink salt water, period. Do not drink your pool water. Although I did have a neighbor who recently had their water tested and said that it had a high enough chlorine rate that it was almost like the pool water in their backyard. That's when I started using my filter on my refrigerator and no longer drank out of the tap. So obviously steer away from highly chlorinated water and don't drink salt water at all, because that salt will get in your body. It's a desiccant. It will absolutely dehydrate you. Bad, no bueno. Another thing about drinking things like booze, it does not keep you warm. It creates the illusion of warmth. Just like eating Oreos creates the illusion of being full. It is not, or Chinese food, if you've ever eaten that. And like 30 minutes later, you're like, I could totally eat some more right now. I thought I was full. Apparently I am not. It's similar with the drinking of the alcohol. It does not keep you warm. It actually lowers your core temperature, and it impairs your judgment, and it might cause you to wander away from the fire because you think you're super warm and everything's fine, and then 20 minutes later your core temperature has dropped so low that now you're going through safety measures because guess what? You weren't really that warm. You were just intoxicated. So be mindful of that, please. Although certainly in my youth, I definitely had a lot of fun drinking out at campfires. And I remember one time being at one where it was so cold that we had to put the keg in the fire. You're not going to like me telling you this story. You're going to think we were stupid. The keg was freezing. It was so cold. And our genius idea was to put the keg into the fire for just a few minutes, enough to melt the beer on the inside so that we could then take it out of the fire and then continue to pour keg beer out of the keg. And I know you're already thinking, this dude's an idiot. We were, in our defense, in that 18 to 21-year-old range. It was a bunch of fraternity brothers, and we were all a little bit clueless about life. So yes, I understand now, telling that story, how stupid we sounded, because I think there's a combustion issue that we could have come across. So don't do that either. If you think that I don't know if the myth out there exists that a really good way to unfreeze a keg is to put it directly on top of a burning fire in the woods. I'm going to go ahead and say, while that did work at that one time, we were probably lucky that we didn't explode that keg and send shards of aluminum all around the campfire. So don't do that either. Let's just go ahead and let's just take that off the board. Let's just take that off the board. I came across a bunch about frostbite. Should you feed somebody or give them water if they have frostbite? That seemed to come up quite often. That one sounds like yes, you can feed and water somebody with frostbite. No, you should not let them sleep. And rubbing the skin of somebody with frostbite can cause further damage. Apparently, it is not going to necessarily warm up a lot of their body. That friction actually can just cause damage to the skin that's already beginning to lose its circulation. So don't be rubbing skin of somebody frostbitten. Do not let them sleep. Yes, you can give them food and water, and certainly if you've got more layers of clothing, that could help. If their feet are wet, and that's where the frostbite's showing up, because it will tend to happen at the appendages first, in the toes and the fingers. So certainly figuring out a way to warm them up. Another one that I came across when it comes to frostbite is that yes, if somebody is extremely cold, reducing the layer of clothing clothing that you are wearing between the two of you, getting into some kind of sleeping bag or one of those emergency blankets that can reflect the heat back off, wrapping yourselves in that completely. And then basically we're looking for a lot of skin on skin touching here, because then your body heat can be transmitted through your skin into their skin and can help warm them up. So that's certainly one that if you find the person is extremely cold, if maybe they fell into some water, you can get yourselves down to your skivvies and you could sit there and help them warm up through your own body heat. This is one I actually thought was real. I actually thought that you could eat snow in order to hydrate yourself. That is not very good, according to multiple sites. 10 parts like snow or ice to get 1 part water, so it would take like 10 liters of snow to get yourself 1 liter of water, and your body would have to spend a lot of time warming that water up and just getting it to go from ice into something that's actually fluid. So in this scenario, if you are around a lot of snow and you need it for hydration, you're going to want to put it in some kind of receptacle that could melt it over fire. That would be the more beneficial way in order to get yourself hydrated if you are around a bunch of snow. Dead bodies can cause epidemics of disease and devastation. I swear I think I came across this one on Reddit. Bodies by themselves, although they are full of bacteria and they're not to be touched and poked and prodded, and certainly wash your hands if you do come across a dead animal of any sorts. It's not necessarily the dead animal or the dead body that could potentially be putting out the disease or the germs and all of that stuff. It's where it's located. So if it's located in a pool of water, I would stay out of that pool of water. I wouldn't put my hands in it. I wouldn't walk in it. I would stay away from things like that. Certainly if you have a life straw, then you're familiar with the fact that it claims that you can put it down into dirty water, even with like a dead animal in it, and you'll be able to drink that out of there and you'd feel perfectly good and fine. So just understand that while dead carcasses and humans and remains and things of that nature by themselves just sitting off underneath a tree aren't going to necessarily cause you to be sick. It's any interaction that you have with that, or any interaction with a water or something that has touched that area. And then if you were to rub your eyes and things of that nature, then the bacteria could be transmitted over into you. So be mindful of that whenever you're in those scenarios. I mean, obviously, we don't want to be drinking standing water. And if that's your only means of hydration, then certainly you're going to be looking for boiling methods and purification methods that should be in your go bag or in your camping gear. A couple about being lost in the woods, or whether you should stay put or start a fire. I mean, staying put might work if people know where you're at. If nobody knows where you're at, probably not the best idea to just sit down and hope for the best. I actually have a great story about this. I was in Mexico City and decided to hike to the peak of one of their mountains. It was in the Desiertos de los Leones National Park, and I can't tell you the name of the peak right now, but I basically just had an Uber drop me off at what I thought was the best trailhead to take. Mexico City did not have signs on this mountain, other than telling some people on Instagram and the woman that I was seeing at the time, who's now my current girlfriend, that I was going up on this mountain. Nobody knew I was up there. I mean, I think I told Instagram, like, hey, if you don't hear from me in like 9 hours, assume that I'm stuck on the mountain and call help. I think 15 people liked that message, and I'm not sure they were all waiting with bated breath to see if 9 hours later I got back up on Instagram and told them that I was alive and doing fine. So again, sitting still in that, let me tell you why this matters, because on the way down, this humongous storm came in. It started getting dark very quick. I had 2 cell phones. Both were below 15%. Nobody really knew where I was. I had maybe 64 ounces of water still on me and 3 or 4 protein bars, and I was dressed for a hot summer day on a mountain in Mexico City, not for a cold, wet night. And I was immediately drenched. The deluge came down. I was following this trail that I was fingers crossed the whole way that it was going to take me where I wanted to go. I could not stop on that trail and just hope for the best. There was no humans around. Nobody knew I was up there for the most part. There was not going to be a rescue party showing up in the middle of the night, dropping Navy SEALs out of a helicopter with ropes, coming down. strapping me to it and flying me to the warmth of my bed. I had to keep moving. And it's actually a great story I tell on stage for perseverance and just like one step. I just kept telling myself, just keep walking. You cannot sit down. And I was cold. I mean, my thumbs were numb. Like, it was bad. Do not stop if you're lost in the woods, if nobody knows where you're at. Another one, signal fires. Yeah, I mean, potentially. Mirrors are going to be better to reflect lights off into, let's say the eyes of somebody flying by. But certainly a fire, which one will bring you warmth. And two, if you're in an area where there might be a lot of people who could potentially smell or see your fire, now are they going to come over, or are they just going to think that you're camping? So you also have to ask yourself, what perspective might they be seeing this fire from? One of, hey, I'm just hanging out in the woods and I've got a fire cooking me some hamburgers and hot dogs, or hey, this is a fire where I need to go over to that person and find out if they need help. You might find yourself in a position where they just don't think that they need to come over to you because they don't think anything's wrong. So potentially signal fire, not so great. This could be where a whistle or a really loud air horn could come in handy. Some myths about animals that they can predict earthquakes. This was all over Reddit. I couldn't even believe. Well, I don't even know. It wasn't like a main topic. It was just something that got lost in the fray. But these people were birds know. And I guess maybe you've seen the movie 2012 or The Day After Tomorrow or something, and all the birds are flying away, and here comes a climate apocalypse to end all apocalypses. I mean, while you might see some animals behaving erratically before an earthquake or, a storm shows up, there's a good chance if they're already reacting that you should have been responding long before you saw the birds flying away. What can you outrun a tornado? Tom Rigsby, who runs this whole thing, used to be a storm chaser, and he'll be the first to tell you that tornadoes move very erratically, and certainly if it looks like it's not moving at all, that's a good indication it's coming towards you or away from you. But if it's moving, side to side, then that's how you know it's not heading towards you. If it looks like it's not moving at all, because it is moving, then that's an indication that it's coming vertically toward you or away from you. You probably couldn't tell which one just based off the fact that it's not moving. But if you do see the movement left to right, that at least tells you that you're not currently in its path. But if you think that, if you had a Lamborghini, you could outrun a tornado, certainly if you're that close to a tornado that you're trying to outrun it, there's a very good chance that there's going to be a road full of debris, and there's probably a storm that's also happening, and if you're the only one out there, more power to you. But there's probably a really good chance that there are other people trying to get away from that tornado too. So it's not like you've got a speedway, straight, clean road, nothing going wrong. So I would find myself in a position to not need to outrun a tornado. There's one when it comes to your windows. It's taping windows during a hurricane. Certainly if they break, this can help reduce the shards and being able to go about. My buddies who live in Fort Myers, they actually put plywood over their windows. So whether it's storm shutters or plywood that you can easily put up when you know the hurricane's coming. But taping them is not going to necessarily, they're not going to prevent it from shattering. It just might, if the pressure were to cause the entire thing to explode, you might just be able to to keep it all in one piece a little bit more. Just like opening windows during a tornado, according to multiple sites, says that it's not very effective. It actually could increase damage because now you're letting the elements into your home. I put a bunch of it on here. All right, one I found that has nothing to do with preparedness, but goldfish have been shown to have memory spanning months and can be trained to perform tasks. So when you have a memory like a goldfish, it's not standard that they have a 3-second memory. Bats are not blind. They actually have a decent, okay eyesight. They just use their sonar capabilities to do the things that they do. Bulls do not charge at the color of red. They charge at the motion of the matador's cape. Porcupines cannot shoot their quills. That is not a real thing. It's just not. I went to multiple sites. I tried to find any reports. I went on YouTube. I'm like, please, there's got to be a video of a porcupine shooting quills. Not a thing. And birds do not actually have that good a sense of a smell. So touching a baby bird is not going to necessarily cause the mama bird to abandon it. We had this issue over the summer when a baby bird fell out of a nest. I knew this about it. I still used a piece of cardboard to scoop it up and put it back into this mama bird had laid like 4 or 5 little tiny eggs in this flower pot that we had hanging on our front porch. And every time we opened the front door, I would notice that this bird would fly away from this flower pot. And after it happening for like a week, I was like, okay, why is this bird every single time I come out flying away from this flower pot? Well, I'm tall enough to be able to look up into the flower pot, whereas my girlfriend and her son are not. And I see these little tiny green eggs. And I'm like, oh my goodness, she built a nest inside this flower pot. And so for the next however long, couple weeks, month, we got to watch her continuously go in and out. And then one day, sure enough, they came out of their eggs, and then she fed them, and then like 3 or 4 weeks later, they flew out. It was the coolest thing. And that was probably the closest experience I've ever had to being able to just see the entire bird process from egg to old enough to fly away. In fact, the very first day they all flew away, one actually ended up in my garage and landed on the mower I was trying to fix. And we had to get it back up to where we had to scoop it up and put it on top of my girlfriend's car, hoping that that would be high up enough off the ground that it could fly. And sure enough, it flew away, and that was the last time we ever saw that bird. So you can touch birds. That's the point of that one. They don't have a very good sense of smell, so just keep that in mind. I think we've covered a lot here. I just wanted to joke about some of these things. Eating snow, rubbing, drinking seawater. Moss doesn't always grow on the north side of a tree. A lot of varying factors. While that does seem to be something that's pretty consistent, there can be a lot of varying factors as far as rainfall, precipitation, where the sun might be able to creep through the trees, the canopy, in order to shine down upon the tree. So that is not always going to hold as a fact. Do not cut somebody's leg open where they were bitten by a snake and try to suck it out. That actually does not seem to be an actual thing. I feel like that was popularized on like some Western movie with John Wayne in like 1952, and it was just believed to be a fact. With bears, black bears escape or fight back. Grizzly bears, you can fake your death in certain situations. If you find yourself around a bear, you've made a series of wrong decisions in order to find yourself in that predicament. But certainly with a black bear, make yourself big, be loud, attempt to scare it off, versus a grizzly where playing dead or just not moving at all might very well work. Sidebar on that, if it doesn't work, then you've just laid on the ground and let the grizzly roll up on you. So I hope that you have some people who are waiting off in the wings to triage you up after you get mauled by a bear. If this has ever happened to you, I'm sorry to be laughing about it. In my head, I'm picturing Cocaine Bear. If you've ever heard about that movie, it's ridiculous. It's not a true story. They did find a dead bear who had eaten a bunch of Colombian cocaine that fell out of an airplane, but this bear did not go around terrorizing this town. That part is completely made up, but I think it's on Peacock. It is hilarious if you just go into it knowing that it's ridiculous. Running in zigzags, escapes an alligator. I remember this one from the Crocodile Hunter, may he rest in peace. He's like, no, this isn't, again, not effective. They are not known for their longevity. They fatigue easily. Just get your run on. Get away from it. The alligator will get bored and go do something else much sooner than you running zigzags. And if it's just running, think about this too. If it's running a straight line and you're running zigzags, at some point you are potentially going to run right back over that alligator's current path. If it's not a dummy and just keeps running straight forward, at some point it's going to absolutely catch up to you, because you're doing zigzags, which is more distance than it's doing in a straight line. So just purely algebra and geometry here. Alligator runs in straight lines, you run in zigzags, your path is definitely going to cross over his again. If you are right, like certainly if you did a zigzag off to the left and right, if it may not necessarily always cross back over, but if you were running straight and then you run a little bit left and then you run a little bit right, there's a very good chance you're just running more toward the alligator by allowing it to catch up to you than you are running away from it. So, but again, if you find yourself being creeped up on by an alligator, there have been a series of missteps along the way that will be really good for you to do an AAR of once you have gotten safely away, to say, what can we do in the future to not be near alligator? All right, my friends, that is the comedic approach to some of the myths. We're not all a bunch of paranoid hoarders. We don't all have bunkers. We're not all spending a vast fortune in order to create this life. What we're doing is just looking for ways to be sustainable, to allow ourselves to have some level of self-sufficiency, to be there for ourselves, our family members, our communities, in whatever way is the most beneficial, considering our level of preparation and our just ability to be there for others. You might have more water than your neighbor who has more food than you, and there's always that opportunity to step into abundance if you are creating abundance before you need abundance, because the worst time to try to repair your leaky roof is during a hurricane. So let's be thinking about these things. And as we near Christmas, this would be a really cool opportunity. And those of you listening in the archive, it might actually be May right now. But for those of you who are listening concurrently to when these are released, this is a really cool opportunity to buy yourself some equipment that you would like to have for your emergency preparedness. One of my friends got his wife a really awesome bug out bag, and he's so excited with all the things that he got for the bag, and she already had a bunch of stuff but didn't just have a bag specifically for this. So he got multiple bags he's putting together, and he's super excited to give these to his wife, and she's into this, so she's going to be very happy to have received these things. So certainly with the holidays approaching, going out and finding a tent that can basically roll up into the size of a water bottle, and finding a sleeping bag that's super lightweight but holds in warmth. These are really cool gifts, and you can find a lot of places online right now that are offering these things at some tremendous deals, because it is, of course, holiday season and everybody's trying to sell a bunch of stuff to get themselves into the black for the year. So if you are thinking about doing some cool gifts, it's not such a bad idea to be leaning into the preparedness aspect of your theme for the Christmas gifts this year. As always, when you're ready to build the skills and the network and the confidence to be prepared for whatever comes next, join us at AmericanContingency.com. We're here when you're ready. We'll keep the fire going for you so you can find your way. I hope you've all had an amazing 2024. If everything works out, I might be able to get Tom on the show to talk about the state of the American Contingency Union before the year is up. It's been a blessing to be here with you for this last year. Thank you, everyone who has supported the show, to everybody who reads the blogs, to everybody who's just actively participating in American Contingency in your own life, in your family's life, in your community's existence, to betterment of all of us, to learn, to prepare, to grow, and share. It has just absolutely been a blessing to see the growth in all of you this year who I've had an opportunity to connect with. I can't wait to see what goes on in our lives in 2025. I'm going to err on the side of probably not any less chaotic than 2024 felt, but that's certainly just more opportunities for us to show ourselves that we're prepared when we need to be prepared. As always, my friends, it's been a blessing. Take care of yourselves. That fire's always roaring for you, so you can find your way. Have a Merry Christmas. Have a Happy New Year. Hopefully I will talk to you with TR on the microphone before the year is up. Bless you all. Be well. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.